Chapter 1. The silence of iron, the stars above segmentum obscurus burned like icy wounds in eternity, but for those living under the grip of the Imperium, the light offered no comfort. On the industrial world of Rorquo's Prime, there was only smoke, iron, and toil. For millennia, the planet had fed the Imperium's armies with ammunition, armor, and blood. No one born here dreamed of anything but work and death. The colossal hive city of Durathis rose like a mountain of rust and concrete. Its tallest spires pierced the clouds, while the lower levels were drowned in eternal night, filled with toxic fog and rotting machinery. It was down there, in the darkness, that something began to stir. The spark of the worker Joran Vale had worked in the smelters since he was a child. His hands were scarred, his lungs filled with soot, but his mind remained clear. He had always asked more than he should, and it had cost him dearly. Guards had beaten him, priests had warned him, but the questions never ceased. One night, he gathered with 3 others in an abandoned tunnel. Marlene Kaur, whose brother had recently vanished in the factory, Dren Luthar, a young man with strangely intense eyes, and Severin, an older worker who had seen too much. "They take people," Marlene whispered. "They say it's accidents. But I've heard noises down in the underworks, machines that aren't ours." Joran looked at her. "What do you mean?" "My brother was taken by the Mechanicus. No one comes back, and I've seen symbols etched into the metal, not the Emperor's. Something else." The words chilled the room. To speak like that was heresy, but they all knew she was right. "We must find out the truth," Joran said finally. "Better to die with eyes open than live in lies." Inquisitor Kael Dravenn on the upper levels of Durathis, far above the workers' world, smoke clung to the spires. There, in a cathedral built of black iron, stood Inquisitor Kael Dravenn before an altar. He was a man of steel and silence, his body marked by centuries of war against the enemies of the Imperium. Reports had reached him. Disappearances, accidents, unrest in the factories. For others it was routine, but for an Inquisitor it reeked of treachery. He activated his vox, acolytes. "We have work to do." From the shadows, his companions emerged. Lyrana, a psyker with eyes glowing with power. Thane, an assassin of the Officio Assassinorum, silent as death itself. And Magos Urind, a tech priest muttering binary prayers to the machine. "We go to the depths of the hive city. No one may hide anything from us, not even the Mechanicus." The chambers of the deep, as Joran and his companions snuck down into the tunnels of the underworks, the air grew suffocating. Pipes dripped, walls were covered with symbols. At first ordinary cogs and codes, but soon they twisted into something different, almost alive. "These are not holy sigils," whispered Marlene. "This is something else." They continued until the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a machine none of them had ever seen. Black metal, pulsating light in its core. It seemed to watch them. A sound echoed, steps. Heavy, metallic. 2 tech priests stepped forward, their bodies more machine than man. Red lenses glowed where their eyes should be. "You should not be here," said one, voice slicing like steel. "You have seen the forbidden." Behind them, dragging sounds echoed. Figures with metal in their flesh, twisted bodies, half human, half machine, driven by the will of the dark machine. "The Emperor's blood," whispered Severin. "The Inferno begins." Panic gripped them, but Joran refused to give in. He raised his hammer. "If you want to silence us, you'll do it with blood." The fight broke out. Metal against flesh, screams against sparks. Marlene slashed with a stolen knife. Dren lunged at one of the twisted machine slaves. Joran swung his hammer, smashing one of the red lenses, but they were too many. The machine slaves surged forward. Then a new force entered the chamber. A voice thundered, "For the Emperor." Inquisitor Kael Dravenn and his companions stormed in. Lyrana's eyes flashed, invisible force tore the machine slaves apart. Thane moved like a shadow, his blade finding flesh between steel. Magos Urind screamed binary curses at the treacherous tech priests. Joran stared in shock. They had never seen anything like it. Kael raised his weapon, a bolt pistol that roared like thunder. "No heresy survives my gaze. You workers live because you can speak. You will tell us everything." The revelation when the battle subsided, the machine slaves lay in tatters, but the dark core of the machine still pulsed, as if mocking them. Magos Urind stepped forward, his mechanical eyes glowing. "This is impossible. It's not Imperial technology, not even Xenos. It's something older." "Or something devilish," said Kael, aiming his weapon at the core. But before he could fire, the entire chamber roared. The machine awoke. Lights swelled, voices echoed in the air, the language of metal mixed with whispers that cut through the mind. Joran fell to his knees, Marlene screamed. Lyrana raised her hands, the power around her flickering. "It's trying to speak," she hissed. "Not with words, with wills. It wants to be freed." Kael fixed his gaze on her. "Then we must make sure it remains imprisoned. At any cost." As they retreated from the chamber, the tunnels shook as if by an earthquake. The machine's power spread like a disease through the hive city. The light in its core followed them, like an eye that refused to close. Joran knew his life would never be the same. He had sought the truth, and now he had found something worse than he could have ever imagined. Kael led them forward, dark and unyielding. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Rorko's prime is infected, and we will cut out the rot, even if it costs the planet itself." No one spoke against him, for in the Imperium's darkness, any price was allowed, as long as the Emperor's name was called when blood fell. Chapter 2. The echo of the machine Durathis had always lived in noise. The smelters roared, the presses struck like hearts of iron, and the workers' shouts mingled with the grinding of eternally worn machines. But since that night in the chamber, when the black machine had awakened, the sounds had changed. A new hum hung in the air, almost imperceptible, like a tone vibrating through the metal itself. Voices whispered through the pipes, mechanical hymns interwoven with something alien. At first, only the workers heard it. They fell silent, working with vacant stares, as if listening to something other than the overseer's orders. Then even the servitors, the mindless machine slaves, began moving in strange rhythms, as if hearing a song only they could understand. The hive city was no longer just a place. It had begun to sing. Interrogation of Inquisitor Kael Dravenn in an abandoned administrative hall, where old bureaucratic murals of the Emperor's icon flaked with rust and dust. Inquisitor Kael Dravenn sat. He was a shadow of iron against the torchlight. Before him sat Joran, Marlene, Dren, and Severin, still marked by the night in the chamber. "You have seen something no one else may see," Kael said, in a low, cutting voice. "You may choose to serve the Imperium in this, or die here and now, I care not which." His words were not threats, they were facts. Marlene closed her eyes and whispered, "If the machine takes more, then I want to resist." "I follow you." Severin trembled, his hands shaking, but when Kael's gaze fell on him, he nodded with dry lips. Dren smiled, a strange, almost hungry smile, and said, "I have waited for this day. Let me be your sword." Joran met the Inquisitor's gaze. The hatred he had felt in the chamber still burned within him, now mixed with something else, a certainty that he could no longer return to his old life. "I have nothing left to lose. I follow you until the blood in me runs dry." Kael rose slowly, his cloak sweeping the floor. "Then it is decided. You are now my acolytes. From this moment, your lives belong to me, and through me to the Emperor. Fail, and you burn." The Psyker Lyrana smiled faintly in the background. "You think you have chosen," she said softly. "But in truth, the choice was never yours." Corruption in the depths meanwhile, far below the hive city, tech priests sat in their chambers. They prayed to the spirit of the machine as they always had, but their voices changed. Binary hymns became distorted by foreign interference, codes none of them recognized. Their implants blinked, eyes glowing with alien light. Machines that had lain dormant for centuries began to awaken. Ancient presses rattled to life without power. Servitors twitched, moving to an invisible rhythm. Even the rusted war machines that stood as monuments in scrap heaps began to shake in their chains. In a solitary workshop, Magos Urind, Kael's companion, stood. His mechanical eyes stared at screens filled with streams of data. He saw numbers that defied the sacred logic of the Imperium. Symbols twisting, echoes of a language he did not know. "It's not just code," he whispered. "It's a mind, a pattern. It speaks through the machines." A wave of signals pressed against him, as if the data streams sought to devour his very consciousness. He tore himself away, cold sweat running down his flesh. I must warn the Inquisitor, otherwise we are already lost. The descent into maintenance. Kael and his new companions traveled deeper into the hive city's inner reaches. The paths were narrow, pipes dripping oil, and the air thick with dust and chemicals. Joran felt claustrophobia pressing against his chest, as if the metal itself wanted to swallow them. On the walls, they saw more and more of the strange symbols. At first, only mechanical sigils, but soon twisted forms, almost alive. Joran ran his hand over a carving. It felt warm, as if the metal were breathing. "This is not a human hand," he said quietly. "It is no hand at all," Lyrana replied. "It is a will writing through the world." They followed the whispers, a low rumble through the pipes, until they reached a vast hall. The hall's dome was broken, cracked so that dark mists seeped down from above. There on the floor, hundreds of workers knelt in circles. Their eyes were empty, their bodies twitching in time with an invisible rhythm. In the center stood a machine, not as large as the black core they had seen, but still alien. Pipes jutted out like tentacles, blinking lights shifting in time with the workers' movements. A figure stepped from the shadows. A tech priest, but transformed. His body a grotesque blend of flesh and metal, cables coiled from his chest, his arms replaced with mechanical tools, his face hidden behind a mask, red eyes glowing. "You are too late," he said, his voice stuttering between metal and human. "The machine has already begun to sing, and these souls are its first choir." The workers began to chant in unison. The words were no language any of them knew, metallic syllables, a hymn that made the air vibrate. "Stop them," roared Kael, drawing his bolt pistol. The battle begins. Kael's first shot thundered like lightning. A worker exploded in blood and metal shavings. The body had already begun transforming, cables protruding like veins. Kael stormed forward, sword in one hand, pistol in the other. Thane vanished in a blink, his blade striking from the shadows, tearing the neck of a slave. Lyrana raised her hands, eyes glowing. An invisible wave hurled dozens of workers backward, their bodies crushed against the walls. But every time one fell, another rose, driven by the rhythm of the hymn. "They're too many," screamed Marlene, slashing with a stolen knife. Joran swung his hammer, smashing one of the twisted faces. Blood and oil sprayed, yet the worker still smiled, murmuring the hymn's words. "They are already lost," gasped Severin. "We fight the dead." The power of the hymn amid the fight, the tech priest raised his arms. The cables in his body pulsed, and the rhythm of the hymn quickened. The workers surged forward like waves, without fear, without pain. "The machine calls them," screamed Lyrana. "We must silence the priest, or we all die here." Kael carved a path, each step leaving corpses behind. "With me," he shouted. Joran, Marlene, and Dren leapt after him, while Lyrana and Thane held back the hordes. The duel they reached the priest. He was larger than they had thought, his body more machine than human. His arm transformed into a blade, crackling with energy. Kael met him with his sword. Iron clashed against iron, sparks raining. Joran struck from the side, his hammer smashing the priest's metal leg. Marlene lunged, cutting the cables protruding from his chest. "You don't understand," hissed the priest. "This is the dawn of a new age, not the Emperor's tyranny, the freedom of the machine, the eternal song." "Silence," Kael spat. He knocked the blade aside, pressed his pistol to the priest's head, and fired. The explosion scattered sparks across the hall. The priest fell, his body twitching, yet the hymn's echo continued. Aftermath they stood among the bodies, bloody and breathless. Hundreds of workers lay dead, but the air still vibrated with the sound of the hymn, as if the machine mocked them. Lyrana fell to her knees, sweat running down her brow. "We cannot kill this," she whispered. "The machine is not here. What we saw was only fragments, an echo. The core itself lies deeper." Kael wiped blood from his sword. "Then we dig deeper. If I must tear down all of Durathis stone by stone, I will find it." Joran looked at him, filled with both fear and respect. "And if it's not just a machine? If it's something greater?" Kael's eyes were cold as steel. "Then we burn it. No price is too high, so long as the Emperor prevails." End of chapter. As they left the hall, the ground shook beneath their feet. From far below came the sound of something awakening, as if the very foundations of the hive city had begun to move. Marlene grasped Joran's arm, her face pale. "We should never have come down here," she whispered. Joran stared into the darkness awaiting below. "We had no choice, and now there is only one way left, forward." And somewhere, in Durathis's hidden depths, the black core blinked. Like an eye opening wider, ready to gaze upon the world with a vision no human could bear. Chapter 3. The damned of the hymn. Durathis' hive city breathed in rhythm. Hammer strikes, machine presses, the grinding footsteps of servitors, all blended into the eternal symphony that forged the empire's wealth. But as the hymn's song spread, the rhythm changed. There was a new undertone, a whisper slinking through the pipes, a pulse in the walls, a sensation in the air that made the skin crawl. For many, it was just a sound to ignore. But for those who had truly heard it, Joran, Marlene, Dren, and the others, it was more than sound. It was a presence, and it was growing. The Council Inquisitor Kael Dravenn had chosen an abandoned administrative hall to gather his men. Once imperial bureaucrats had written reports and counted resources there. Now, papers lay scattered across the floor like dead leaves, and a broken imperial aquila hung from the ceiling, its wings covered in rust. A holographic map of the hive's depths was projected on the wall. Glowing lines traced levels, pipe systems, and maintenance tunnels. At the bottom, a point blinked red and ominous. Magos Erend, the wounded tech priest still loyal to the Empire, pointed with his metal fingers. His voice crackled as he spoke. "I have traced the signals. The hymn's code does not pulse randomly. It has an origin. It leads here. To sections sealed in M31, these areas should not even exist anymore." Lyrana, the psyker, pressed a hand to her temple. Her eyes were dark as storm clouds. "I feel it too. Down there is the source. It sees us. It waits." Kael stood with arms crossed. His face was a block of stone, but a cold hatred burned in his eyes. "We go there, we find the core and destroy it. The Emperor demands nothing less." Marlene looked down at the map, then at Kael. "And if it cannot be destroyed, if it is something greater?" Kael slammed his hand on the table, making the projection flicker. "Everything can be destroyed, with enough fire." The hymn's victims, they moved downward, level by level. Each step was a journey into another world. On the higher levels, life still lingered, workers hurrying past, eyes fixed on the floor. But the deeper they went, the emptier the tunnels became. Workshops stood abandoned, as if the workers had simply risen mid-shift and left. Machines were silent, but the walls pulsed faintly, as if the hive city itself were breathing. They found bodies too. A man who had torn open his own chest, as if trying to extract something. A woman whose face was gone, replaced by metal fused to her skin. Some were still alive, half-conscious, mumbling words in a language none of them understood. Marlene covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. "I knew him," she whispered, pointing to a body. "He lived 2 corridors away from me." Kael responded coldly. "He was your neighbor. Now he is the enemy. Remember that." Joran looked at the dead man, at the empty eyes. He hated Kael's words, but he knew they were true. The darkness moves. They reached a tunnel where the lumen lamps had died. Only the flickering torchlight provided illumination. The walls were covered in engravings, symbols burned into the metal from within. They glowed faintly, like wounds that never healed. Suddenly, there was movement, metal against stone. "Formation," Kael hissed. Figures emerged from the darkness. Servitors, but they were changed. Their tools had become weapons, their faces torn away and replaced with mechanical mesh. They did not move like machines, they moved like an army, synchronized to the rhythm. Magos Erend raised his voice, filled with horror. "They are our own. The machine has taken control of them." Kael lifted his sword. "Then we give them peace, through death." The tunnel battle. Kael fired his bolt pistol. The explosion tore the first servitor apart. Fragments of bone and metal rained over the group. Lyrana stretched out her hands and sent a psychic shockwave forward. 3 servitors were hurled into the walls, crushed in a metallic rain. But she immediately fell to her knees, screaming. "They are trying to sing through me." Joran lunged forward. his hammer smashing a servitor's leg. He pulled Marlene behind him. She slit the throat of one approaching from behind, blood and oil spraying her face. Dren moved like a shadow, swift and efficient. His blade sang, and each strike took a life. But Joran thought he saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of joy, almost worship. Severin, the youngest, fought in panic. He fired wildly with a las pistol, tears streaming down his dirty cheeks. "We can't do this. There are too few of us. No retreat," Kael roared, his sword blazing in the lumen light. "Forward in the Emperor's name." The battle was bloody, chaotic. The servitors' numbers seemed endless. Every time one fell, another rose, driven by the hymn's rhythm. The sacrifice, Severin screamed as a servitor lunged at him. Its claws tore through his chest, blood spraying. He fell to the ground, eyes wide in shock. Joran and Marlene tried to reach him, but it was too late. He coughed blood, pointing at Kael. "Burn, burn it all before it sings again." Then he died. Kael froze, showing no sorrow. He lifted his sword again. He died in service, forward. Joran felt anger boil inside him. Severin was only a boy, yet his life was already a sacrifice. The sealed doors, after hours of combat, they reached a massive gate. It was covered in sigils, rusty and cracked, but still strong. Above it, old warning runes were etched, forbidden, sealed in the Emperor's name. Mago's Urind studded the locks. This is not just the work of the Empire. Someone reinforced the seal, as if they wanted to hide this forever. Kael placed his hand on his sword. "Then we know we have found the right place. Open it." "If I do, we release something we cannot close again," Urind replied. "If we do not, it will consume the entire planet," Kael said. Urind hesitated, then began muttering binary prayers. His hands moved in a pattern, sparks flying from the consoles. Slowly, the gate began to open. The sound was like a scream, as if the very metal suffered. Behind the gate waited darkness, a darkness that sang. The descent they entered, one by one. The walls were covered in cables that pulsed like veins. The floor vibrated, the air tasting of iron and blood. Lyrana fell to her knees. "It sees us, it sees right through us." Kael pulled her up. "Rise, you will bear your burden until the end." Joran felt it in his chest, as if something tried to pierce his soul. A voice whispered, "You are strong, stronger than them. You deserve more. Leave them, and I will make you my first, my son of the machine." He clenched his teeth, raising his hammer. "I am no son of yours." The core pulsed ahead, as if smiling. They reached a hall. It opened before them like a cathedral built of machine and flesh. In the center floated a black light, pulsing, alive. Around it stood hundreds of bodies, kneeling in silent worship. As the group entered, they began to rise, eyes glowing, mouths opening in unison. The hymn began again, stronger than ever. Kael raised his weapon. "No turning back now, we face the core." And the hall's darkness filled with song. Chapter 4, the song of the core. Durathis' heart was no longer a city. The hive city's levels were ruins of steel, metal, and flesh, and deep within its core lay that which no one should have seen. Pulsating, black, alive, the core. When Kael Dravenn and his companions stepped through the shattered gate, the heat hit them like living fire. The walls pulsed like veins, cables slithered like snakes, and from the floor rose vapors of metal and blood. Slowly they began to understand. The hive city itself was now an organism. At the center floated the core, a black sphere, breaking the light and drawing it inward. Around it knelt hundreds of people, workers, servitors, tech priests. Their eyes were empty, their bodies twitching in rhythm with the pulse emanating from the core. As they opened their mouths, the air filled with a metallic hymn, a song both alluring and terrible. Kael's judgment. Kael raised his sword and gritted his teeth against the reality. There it is, the core, the machine that devours souls and breaks wills. Lyrana fell to her knees, her psychic powers streaming through the room like bolts of light. "It's more than a machine, it's conscious, it sees us, it feels us." Joran stared at the sphere, feeling a voice in his head. "You have suffered under the Emperor's chains. I can give you power, freedom, just speak my name." He raised his hammer. "I am not your slave." The core flickered, as if smiling at him. The hymn's host. The movement began slowly. The kneeling bodies rose by the hundreds, arms stretched, cables bursting through skin. Workers and priests had become something else, the hymn's host. Kael fired a bolt pistol, the shots echoed like thunder through the hall. Servitors fell, but more rose, driven by the song. Lyrana sent out psychic waves that burned and shattered bodies, but her eyes glowed with pain. It sings through us too. Dravenn moved like a shadow, his blade singing, every strike taking life. But Joran saw a glimmer of worship in his eyes, a joy in the violence that unsettled him. Severin, the youngest in the group, fought in panic, tears streaming down his cheeks. "We are too few, we can't." "No retreat," Kael roared. Forward in the Emperor's name. The battle was bloody, chaotic. Each time an enemy fell, another rose. The rhythm of the hymn was eternal. The sacrifice suddenly, a servitor leapt at Severin. Its claws ripped through his chest, blood spraying. He fell, staring at Kael. "Burn everything before it sings again." Then he was dead. Kael stood unflinching, but his heart was cold with determination. He died in service. Forward, Joran's rage boiled within him. Severin was just a boy, and now he was gone. Hatred for the core and its corruption turned into action. The core's outburst, the core flickered, and a glow of black fire cut through the room. Pulsing light filled every corner. The hymn's host teetered on the edge of chaos, but the voice from the core strengthened their power. "I am eternal, you are nothing." Kael stepped forward, sword in hand. "You are judgment, and judgment is dead." But the core responded. Beams of light cut through floors, walls, and human bodies. Kael was thrown backward, but rose again, blood running from his forehead. Betrayal. Suddenly there was a click. A bolt pistol aimed at Kael. Dravenn. His eyes glowed, his face a mechanical smile. "This is no imitation, Inquisitor. It is awakening, and I have heard its song longer than you know." Kael had no time to react, but Joran saw it and threw himself forward. The shot rang out. Not at Kael, at Joran. The hammer fell from his hand, blood spraying from his chest. He fell, looking toward Marlene. "Keep fighting," he whispered. Then he was still. Rage and fire. Marlene screamed, a scream that cut through the hymn's song. She lunged at Dravenn, stabbing him again and again until his body fell lifeless. Kael rose, a storm of wrath in his eyes. He activated a sealed grenade and hurled it at the core. The explosion was light and fire. Hundreds of bodies burned, walls collapsed. The core shook, cracks running across its surface. Screams filled the hall, metallic and demonic at once. The final battle. The core opened like an eye. From it rose a figure, taller than a dreadnought, arms like blades, face a twist of 1,000 souls. "I am the song, I am eternity, you are nothing." Kael raised his sword. "You are judgment, and judgment is dead." He lunged forward. Sword against blade. Bolt pistol shots, Lyrana's psychic fire, Marlene at his side, bloody but unyielding. The fight was impossible, yet they fought. The sacrifice. Lyrana saw the truth. "We cannot kill it, but I can bind it." "With my life." Kael looked at her. "Psyche," she smiled faintly. "I am already burned in the Emperor's eyes. Let me at least be useful." She threw herself forward. Her hands burned like suns. She grabbed the monster, and her body began to ignite from within. Screams filled the hall, hers and the monster's. Aftermath. When the smoke cleared, the monster was gone. The core cracked, dark and still. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls. Kael stood amid the ruins, bloody, tired, but alive. Marlene knelt by Joran's body, holding his hand as if she could wake him again. Mago's Urind approached, eyes flickering. "It's over for now, but this was only one of 1,000 machines. If one could awaken, more can." Kael looked at him, then at the core. "Then we hunt them, one by one, until nothing remains." He lifted his gaze toward the hive city's upper levels. "The Emperor demands blood. We are his hands." Epilogue. Durathis burned. The hive city's levels were cleansed with fire. Thousands of innocents died, but the hymn's song died with them. Kael reported, "Threat neutralized. The costs acceptable." But as he stood alone in the night, he saw Joran's face before him. The man who had sacrificed himself, who had never asked for this fate. And in the night's dream, Kael heard a whisper, faint but there. "I do not sleep, I wait, and next time I will sing louder."